Have you thought about creating your own stunning animations about scientific concepts or processes, but maybe you just don't know how to get started? Whether you're a scientist or an artist, or maybe a mix of each, Cinema 4D is an amazing tool to help you bring scientific stories to life. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the basics of Cinema 4D, specifically tailored to scientific animation, scientific storytelling. By the end of this video, you'll know how to navigate Cinema 4D, how to move around inside the software. You'll have created your first 3D model, and you'll have a basic understanding of how animation works inside the software so you can begin animating your own scientific concepts. Before we get started, I want to share with you a free resource that I have available. It's my Biomedical Animation resources bundle. In there, you're going to find free templates for creating storyboards, mood boards, scripts, creating a shot list. You'll also find resources for finding the best quality anatomical and scientific models out there. And you'll have access to a growing collection of Cinema 4D scenes that'll help get you started on your journey and save you a lot of time. So check out the link in the description and download your free bundle. All right, let's get to it. So why Cinema 4D for creating scientific animation? These are some examples of some of the animations that I've made over the years using Cinema 4D. And I've used just about every 3D animation package out there, from Lightwave to 3D Studio Max. I dabbled in Maya and Blender, and I always come back to Cinema 4D. And the reason is I just feel like it's the most user-friendly, easy to learn interface there is. By comparison, the way things function in Cinema 4D just makes sense. And now with Redshift render engine built in with every Cinema 4D license, you've got a really powerful set of tools and you've got beautiful photorealistic renders and they render quickly. So it's just a wonderful tool. One of the things I think makes Cinema 4D the most easy to learn is just the way that things function. For example, if you wanted to bend something, you simply just drag a deformer, a bend deformer, on as a child of the object. So it has a lot of these like child-parent relationships. So just one thing affects another by making it a child of the one that you want to affect. And that sort of carries through a lot of the functionality throughout the software, whether you're talking about particle systems or deformers or actually parenting things to move them around the screen. So let's get started just by getting a basic understanding of the navigation of the software. I'm going to go ahead and launch Cinema 4D. Every time you launch it, there's this nice splash screen. Right now, we're in version 2025. When the software opens, you always get welcomed by this home screen that has some recent tutorials and templates and things that you can download to get you started. You'll also see a list of some of your most recent files out there. You can just close this and get in here, but I'm going to start off just by kind of doing a clockwise representation of the navigation. So across the top, and I'm on a PC, so it might look slightly different if you're on a Mac. So this is the way it looks. You've got your home button and you've got your tab. So this will bring that launch screen back up that we just talked about. And then you have tabs, right? So you can click new model tabs. If you had a model in here and started creating a scene, for example, and clicked a new tab, it's going to make a brand new scene. And you can start putting some text in there or whatever you need to do. So you can have multiple files open across here. I'll go ahead and close these off. Along the top over here, you see different layouts that you can choose. So we're in our standard layout. We could choose the modeling layout or the sculpting layout or the painting layout. And you'll notice that the menus are changing each time we do that. So I'm going to keep us in the standard layout. And then just moving down a little bit right underneath this, we see the standard file menu. So this is where you can create things. You can get access to all the tools and mesh tools. A lot of the things available in here are also available through the icons around the outside of the system. And then as we move down, we've got access to our asset browser. So this is where you can come in and find all sorts of models and materials. If you need a cookie, this is where you can find your cookie. And these are all freely available models that come with your Cinema 4D license. So everyone has access to these. And then we get our locking navigation. So we have our coordinates. You can see the X, Y, Z coordinate system, and these colors coincide with the gizmo that shows up inside the software. So by clicking on one of these, you're basically locking that axis, and it keeps you from being able to move something along that. And here is our axis control, and you can decide whether you're going to use an object coordinate system or the world coordinate system. And you'll learn more about that as you go. And then we've got our manipulation tools for manipulating polygon models, so vertex editing, edge editing, polygon editing, and then the model itself, and then some texture tools. These are all of our snapping, soloing, and some mirroring tools, some render settings and tools like that, access to the materials manager here. And on the right, we always see our our objects palette out here. So any object that you create, you can see my cube represented in here, always shows up in this objects palette. Moving down, we've got our attributes palette, and we've got our layers palette. So attributes show you the attributes that can be manipulated for each model that you create or each item that you select inside the object panel or on your screen. So you can see right now this cube has an orange line around it. That means that it's selected, and it's also highlighted orange right here. If I were to click off of that, both of those disappear. And so that's how easy it is to select and manipulate an object. Changing any of the attributes here has a real-time live update on the screen. So each object has its own attributes that can be changed. This vertical bar here is a lot of the tools that you can use, null objects, rectangles, all of the model types that you can create, text, tools, different types of manipulations and modifiers to add things together or create sweep objects or things of that nature. And then we've got our volume tools, our cloner, our MoGraph tools. I'm not going to get into all of these today. I'm just kind of giving you a brief overview. Our deformers, so there's a huge set of deformers in here that you can use. I mentioned bend earlier, and this is where you'd access that bend. These are some of our effectors for MoGraph, fields that allow you to manipulate things in a limited way, depending on which field you choose. And then we've got our lighting rigs and stage objects, our cameras, our lights, and some additional make editable buttons. Along the bottom, we've got our timeline, and this is where we can control which frame we're on, right? So we can use these tools to skip one frame at a time, and you can see that frame represented here. You can see that we're starting with a 90 frame animation. That's always the case. You've got a lot of different tools down here for controlling what is able to be animated and what is not able to be animated, how you're recording automatic animation if you're doing that, what your playback is like if you want to go simple to ping pong or cycle. And then in here, you can actually access more deep levels of animation tools by clicking this little button. It opens up what's called the dope sheet. The dope sheet is where you can see more detailed level of what has been animated and all of the keyframes inside your animation. And clicking that again makes it go away. And along the left side here, we have our selection tools, different types of selections. We've got our what we can select on with our selection tool. We've got our move, rotate, scale, place objects, dynamic place objects, all of our spline tools and our brush tools and our drawing tools. So that's kind of a basic overview of the interface. And now I'd like to spend some time just showing you some basic uh, navigation inside the system. How do you move objects? How do you pan around and change your point of view? So that's really some of the most important things to understand right off the bat. And so I'm going to talk about those. With any object selected, as I mentioned before, you can see that object's axis, right? So I can move this object along its x-axis by selecting this red gizmo arrow and just moving it along that axis. If I come into my objects attributes panel over here on the right side of my screen, I can look at coordinates. And now you can actually see what I've done to that object. So I've moved it along the x-axis, and it's giving you a live update. You can also do this numerically by just entering in a number, right? So I could say I want this to move 200 units, 200 centimeters in the X. And it's done that for me. If I wanted to put it back at 0, I can just type in 0 and it's going to go back to the beginning. So I always recommend using these gizmo arrows to manipulate your objects. You're going to get much more reliable motion and movement in your animations if you do it that way, versus just clicking on them and moving them. And what you'll see here is it's actually moving this object in relation to my viewing plane, right? And the coordinate system's all out of whack right now because I'm not making like refined decisions. It's just based on where I've drug my mouse in this view. So not the best way to move things around. You can also use the rotation tool here. So we were just on the move tool. Rotation tool allows you to do the same thing. So by selecting this green guy, I'm rotating around this cube's H coordinate. So we've got position, X, Y, Z. We've got rotation, HPB. So that's heading, pitch, and bank. So if you think about the way an airplane moves, it's got a heading, the direction it's headed. It's got a pitch, and it's got a bank, right? So a pitch is the turning direction, and then the bank is like how the wings are tilted one way or the other. So that's how you can sort of relate to those labels. So you can manipulate these as well just by clicking and sliding inside this numerical area. And then scale, I would recommend not messing with scale when you're using parametric objects. So the scale should be really controlled by manipulating these dimensions inside the object tab. Okay, so that's how you can move something and rotate an object, move and rotate an object. Now let's talk about how you move around an object. How do you manipulate your viewing point, your viewing plane? To do that, you can use the 1, 2, and 3 numbers on your keyboard. So if I hold down the number 1 on my keyboard and then use my left mouse button, I'm going to pan, right? So I'm panning around my screen. If I use the number 2 button and click on my left mouse button, I'm zooming in and out. And it's based on where I click, right? So it's zooming in and out from the point I click on. And number 3 on my keyboard, left mouse button, is going to rotate around my object, right? So again, this is not moving the object, this is moving your point of view. You can get to those same tools by using these little tools up here at the top right. So this is move the camera or pan, this is zoom in and out, and this is rotate, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's just kind of the basics of getting and moving around. So I would recommend spending some time practicing with that. Here's just a couple quick tips if you ever get lost. So let's make a new object. I'm clicking on a cube and I'm going to use my move tool and I'm just going to put it way over there, right? So, oh my gosh, I have made this other cube and if I select it, this little arrow shows up and it tells me where it is, that it's off my screen, but I can't really see it, right? So there's two ways I can get to that. One is I can hold down Option S, and that'll automatically move to my selection. You do the same thing with H, Option or Alt H, and that shows you everything in your view, everything that's in your screen, whether it's selected or not. So those are really good quick tip sort of tools for being able to see everything that's in your scene. And lastly, I want to just show you this toggle view button right here. Toggle view gets you to your quad panel here where you have not only your perspective view, but you have top, front, and right views, right? So if I select this cube right here and I zoom out, you can see it's located here in the z-axis. If I zoom out here, they're actually overlapping each other. If I zoom out here, you're going to see it located along the z-axis to the right, right? So z is back and forward in space. And if I wanted to move something along its x-axis in here, I can do that just by simply dragging it that way, and you'll see it update in all four screens. When you're done working in one of these screens, you can simply click the same button again in whichever screen you want to go back to, and it's going to make that the standard main window for you. So it's pretty easy to access that way. One last thing I'm going to point out, since I have this cube selected and I'm seeing these yellow spheres highlighted, you might wonder what those are. And what those are is another way to control the size of your objects. So many objects, when you create them, will have these sort of little control circles show up. And I can actually change the physical size of my object now by dragging those. So if you wanted to create like a wall, it's very simple to do just by dragging those around versus coming in here and moving it in the coordinate system, right? The coordinate system, of course, gives you exact numbers that you can put in. So many different ways of working. Whatever makes you happy is the one you should use. At this point, I also want to cover just some of the basic modeling tools. And to do that, I'm going to hold this down, right? So these are the standard primitive objects that Cinema 4D allows you to create. And we'll do something simple, like maybe we'll create like a ball and stick sort of situation, right? So maybe I need a sphere and I need some sticks, and I can simply create spheres and cylinders, and I can Control C that sphere and Control V it and move it around, right? If I need to create more cylinders, I can Control C, Control V, copy and paste, and then use my rotation tool and rotate them around. If you click on the little axis so it's highlighted and hold down Shift, it will snap, and you'll see an updated piece of information about how it's snapping. You can see that the cylinders give you options for elongating or changing diameter, right? So you can do that to all of your objects. Copy pasted that one, move it over. All right, so it's really simple to build sort of ball and stick sort of things like that, if that's your thing. You can also create all sorts of different types of objects, from capsules to cones to, tubes. And each of these kinds of objects has their own different manipulation, functionality. And you can see under the Object tab, each one has its own object properties. And so you can come in and manipulate each one of them individually based on the type of object that it is. So the best way to kind of like learn what these really are and how they function is just to spend some time making a bunch of those objects, clicking on them, playing around with the settings, and seeing what they do. I think one last piece I would like to talk about is with your gizmos selected, one thing I didn't mention previously is you have the ability to manipulate on a plane. So in addition to these axis points, these axis arrows, you also have these plane highlights, right? So you can select this object's plane, and I can move it on this XY plane, or I could move it on the YZ plane, or I could move it on the, oh, sorry, this was the XZ plane, and then this is the XY plane, right? So it's always kind of important to understand like what you're looking at. Luckily, there's this world gizmo, right? So this is the axis of your world. It always shows up right here. It always shows up right here. And so I see my x-axis is here, my y-axis is here, and my z-axis is going backwards. So I can always kind of get a sense for where I'm at and what I'm looking at in my world space. Before we get started with creating models in the software, I just want to give you a quick breakdown and overview of what every single animation project has. Every single animation project is going to have these 5 stages. You're going to create models or import models that you've found out there in the world. You're going to add materials to them or clean up the materials if you found the models out there. You're going to add lights to your scene to create that lit environment so your models look really nice. You're going to animate things, move them around, and then you're going to render them out, save them out to finished video. So we're going to go through the creation of a cellular division process using some very simple animation, but we'll go through all of those stages as we do it. All right, now that we have just kind of a basic level understanding of how to move things around, let's make something. Let's make our first model. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these. And I think what I'll do is a simple cell division animation. So we're just going to do like a cell dividing and breaking apart. And I want to show you some of the basic tools that are available in here for creating more organic shapes. And so I am going to start with a sphere. Spheres, I always like to change my sphere type from standard to hexahedron. And I'll show you just quickly what I mean when I say that. If you come up to display and you change your display from the shading option here to shading with lines, you'll see the way your sphere is being constructed, right? So when I had this on standard, this is the way my sphere is being constructed. So it's sort of a standard. So it's kind of a standard like Mercator map projection globe style construction. And what I want to do is change it now to hexahedron. And hexahedron is almost always going to be the best option. There are different types. You can make a hemisphere, you can make a tetrahedron. Sorry, I clicked on something accidentally. You can make a tetrahedron, right? But notice the way the polygons are grouped together. And what you typically want in 3D modeling and 3D animation is as even representation as you can get. Icosahedron is probably the most even, but it's a triangular map. And we have kind of an affinity in 3D animation for quadrangular polygons, so four-sided polygons. And so this is derived from a cube, essentially, right? So if you take a cube and you put it in a subdivision surface and you subdivide it a few times, you basically get this kind of sphere, right? So very similar sort of mapping. Okay, so let's say this is our cell and we want to have some cellular division. I'm going to call this one cell A. So to label things, you just double click on it in the objects panel and you can give it a name. I'm going to duplicate this one by hitting Control C, Control V. If you're in a Mac, it's Command C, Command V. You can also come up to Edit, copy and paste in here. And I'll label this one cell B. And if I want to have these divide, basically, what I want to do is move one in one dimension while the other one moves in the other dimension, right? So I'll have one move in the negative x dimension and while the other one moves in the positive x dimension. So now we're going to get into, you can make so many objects by simply using primitives, right? And then manipulating those primitives or moving those primitives, adding them together. And so I'm going to show you a simple technique using some of the volume tools in Cinema 4D to get a really smooth, beautiful animation of the cell sort of dividing and separating. Okay, so right now we're going to do a mixture of sort of like animation techniques and modeling techniques. And I always like to start with my animation blocking. So we're going to block in this animation. I'm going to take cell A and I'm going to look at my coordinate system. I'm going to use the numerical system here in our coordinates to move this object. And I'm going to put my timeline here back to 0, right? So this is our timeline marker, putting it back to 0. And I'm going to add a keyframe, right? So adding a keyframe right here is record active objects. It's going to record position, scale, rotation, and if you have any point animation, it'll control that. Point level animation right here is turned off at the moment, so it will not be recording that. Okay, so I'm going to record active objects. You'll see that a keyframe shows up, and a keyframe is just a recorded attribute at a specific point in time, right? So at frame 0 in our timeline, I have recorded the position of this cell. I'm going to do the same thing on cell B. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click this button, and it's going to record the position, scale, rotation attributes of that. And you can see that each section in my coordinates tab now has a red keyframe marked for all of those components at this position in time. And so to have these move away from each other, I just need to move down the timeline, right? So I'm clicking on my timeline and decide how long I want this to take. Let's say it's 60 frames. If we're doing a 30 frames per second animation, that is 2 seconds, right? So what I want to do is take this one. I need to know how big this is. It's a 100 centimeter radius sphere, which tells me if I move this in the X about 100 and let's say 130, see how that looks, and then keyframe it. And then I do the same thing to cell A, and I move it negative 130 and keyframe it. That'll be completely separated, right? So this is the animation we have just made. Our cells are moving apart from each other and dividing. Now it's not very convincing right now, right? It looks pretty static and a little bit boring. We're seeing these overlapping, like obviously overlapping shapes. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the volume tools in Cinema 4D to sort of clean this up and smooth it out so we get this like nice sort of gloopy cellular look. So I'm going to use the volume builder, take both of these cells, and I'm going to put it inside the volume builder. Again, I got the volume builder right here in this set of tools. It's also available at the top under volume, and you'll find that's the case for most things, right? So a lot of the tools we've used already, so creating mesh model, create, mesh, these are all the same objects that we have available in this menu. So multiple ways of accessing the same thing. The way the volume builder works is it creates a volume around an object of voxels, right? It takes an object, it converts it to voxels, and fills in those space with three-dimensional pixels, essentially. And the more, under the Object tab for the volume builder, the more voxels, or the smaller the voxels, the more detail I'm going to get. Right, so I'm going to turn this down to something like 5. So it's kind of rough, but not too rough. And what I might do is like just come back in my timeline until these things are sort of joined together, right? And what I want to do now is to smooth these out. And so the volume builder gives us the option of adding a smooth function. And that smooth function is going to sort of connect these. So now as I play my animation, you'll see that they separate and then there's this little sort of like gelatinous connection where they sort of cleave apart from each other, right? So pretty nice. But right now, this is not something that will render, right? So rendering is the final process at the end when we want to spit out some frames, right? We want to tell it to make images. And so what I need to do is add this volume builder to what's called a volume mesher, right? So a volume mesher, make it a child. So remember when I talked about parent-child relationships, right? So these cell A, B are a child of the volume builder, and now the volume builder is a child of the volume mesher. So what that says is, hey, everything that's in my children group, I'm going to make into a voxel. And this one says, hey, every volume that's in my child group as a child of me, I'm going to make a mesh around that. And after that mesh is created, now we've got something that we can actually render, right? So this is creating a mesh, and you can see that mesh visualized real time as these come apart. And if you want more gloopy of an interaction, you can always come in to the volume builder and then come into its object tab and smooth it more. Like the strength, it's doing 1 iteration. What if we did like 3 iterations? Right now it's going to be even more smooth. So that gives us kind of a more gloopy appearance. So the volume mesher and volume builder tools are really nice for, particularly for like biological cellular kind of animations. Just a reminder to grab your free resource bundle. The link's in the description. And also, if you're really interested in pushing your scientific and medical animation to the next level and learning the entire process, I have a course called Biomedical Animation from Storyboard to Finished Animation with Cinema 4D. The link is also in the description. And this class will walk you through every stage from beginning with storyboards, mood boards, your script, your voice track, sounds, music, everything you need to get started, working through the entire production process, creating your models, moving the cameras, setting up the stage for every scene, and into final editing and putting everything together into the final piece. So give that a look. The link is in the description. Okay, so we've got this really nice cellular animation happening. We've got the cells separating. And now let's think about like, what is this going to look like if we were to animate it? Well, right now, if I come up to my Redshift menu, and Redshift, if you've not used any 3D software before, this might seem very foreign. So the way this process works in 3D software is every 3D package has render engines. And a render engine basically takes all the information inside your scene and it calculates the visual appearance. So you can think about it like when we draw a really refined drawing, it's called rendering, right? So that's really what it's doing. It's taking light rays that are put in here by the lights that you place in your scene, and it is calculating those light rays, shadows, bouncing light, all of that, and it is coming up with an image. So that is what rendering is. And so if I come into Redshift, which is our render engine, and I start our interactive preview render, it's going to give us what we will see if we actually render this right now, right? So right now, we don't have any materials on our models, so we haven't told it what to look like. And we don't have any lights in our scene, so it's using what's called the default light. And we don't have our cameras in our scene. We're using the default camera. And you can see that labeled right here, right? So what's happening right now is it's applying a default light in the same position as the default camera, so it's just shining straight at our object no matter which direction we look at it. So I can rotate around my view and the lighting doesn't change, it's always pointing straight at the object. If I move previously in my timeline, you'll see that connection happening. So we're getting a decent image, right? But it's not amazing. So I'm going to turn that back off. So I'm going to Redshift, turn off the IPR just by selecting it again. All right, so we have a basic understanding of how to get around the software. We have a basic understanding of like how to make a model and how to manipulate models. We've done a quick animation. Now we're going to apply some things to it. So let's just give it a basic material. We're going to use this little material manager button, open this up, and we're just going to create a new material. We're going to say material, standard material. There are lots of options. You can come in here and play with them if you want to. We're going to work with just the standard material right now. And again, we're using the Redshift render engine. That is now the default render engine in Cinema 4D. I'm just going to pull this up. So I think it's a good idea to get into the habit of labeling things as you create them. So I'm going to call this, I just double click on it, cell material. And in here, I can change this cell's properties, right? So I can come into the base and I can say, well, what color? Maybe I want this to be like an orange sort of be colored cell. So I can select my color in here. Maybe I want it to not be so reflective. So I can turn down the weight a little bit so it's a little bit less sort of shiny, right? It's got a little roughness to it. You can decide in here if you want it to be transparent or not. Turning this up is going to make your material more glassy, right? So see-through transmission. I'm going to leave this at 0. And just something important to understand with the Redshift materials, they use a numeric value that is typically between 0 and 1. Uh, the cases where it is not 0 to 1, something where it's an actual attribute like index of refraction, right? So this is using a value that represents realistic refraction value, so close to a water or glass type of refraction right now. So you have a lot of settings, and like don't get overwhelmed by all these settings. You can come in and manipulate them over time and start playing around, and you'll figure it out, right? So you have all these different things you can play with. I'm not going to come into those right now. We're just going to have a color, and it's going to have a type of reflection, a little roughness, and that's it. Okay. To get this material on our object, we simply drag it from here, and we can drag it on our object. And you'll see that that's put it on the volume mesher, right? I'm just going to make a couple more objects in here just to illustrate this point. If I wanted this on my cube I just made, I could actually drag it in here in the objects panel as well. I could also select the cube, so I'll delete this one. I could also select the cube, come to my object, right click it and hit apply. And it's going to apply it. So 3 different ways to put your material on an object. Okay, that's how you add object materials. And now if we go into our Redshift and start our IPR, you can see that we are getting that nice orange color. We've got a highlight from our default light. So it's looking really nice, right? Except our lighting's still kind of terrible. So we'll fix that. Okay, so we've got a simple material, we've got a simple animation, we've learned some pretty complicated tools, the object, the volume builder, and the volume mesher. And now I want to make some simple lights for my scene, and I'm going to show you the most basic technique for lighting any scene, and that's 3-point lighting. This is used in film and video. It's used in almost every 3D animation as a good starting point to setting up your lights. And so I'm going to make that for you. I'm going to start with an area light. And I'm going to position these lights in a way so that I have a key light, which is our main light, a fill light, which is like the fill-in secondary light, and a backlight. And that will give us a nice sense of lighting around our model. And so let's do that. So this is just like a basic lighting technique that everybody should know, and it's probably the best thing to start with. Okay, so positioning lights in Cinema 4D is interesting. Like I could come in here and I could grab the axis for the slide and move it around and put it up here, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is select the light. I'm going to come into this Cameras tab and say Use Camera, Selected Object as Camera. And what's cool is now I am looking through the light. And if I move my scene using the 1, 2, 3 buttons, I am actually positioning my light by looking through it. So pretty fancy. So I'm just going to do a top left lighting. So I position the light in a top left position. And now this is important. You either want to come here and select default camera or come back to cameras and say default camera. So I've come out of that light now. And if I do IPR now, you'll see that my lighting has completely changed. The default light has disappeared. So as soon as you make a new light in your scene, the default light turns off. Now that default light has disappeared and I'm only getting top left lighting, and this is going to be called my key light. And now what I'll do is make a new area light. And I want to use another light to fill in these shadow areas, right? So that they're not just black. And that's why that light is called a fill light. So I'll go ahead and label this one fill light. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to look through this light by going to, I selected it, and now I'm going to use camera, select object as camera. Gonna zoom out using my 2 button. And I'm gonna use my 3 button to rotate down. And I can start to see sort of the edge of that positioning, right? I can start to see the highlight part in here. And then I'll hit my default camera, right? So now you can see that the fill light is sort of filling in some of that. I might want to move it down a little bit more. So I'll look through it again. Or I could just come out here, zooming out, move it down, rotate. I want to bring it out here a little bit more as well. Okay, I want to see some of that like core shadow showing up, just very slightly. Something to understand about lights is the closer the light is to the object, the more bright it is. And the bigger it is, the more bright it is, right? So if I wanted this to be less bright, I could use the scale tool and just click out here on the empty space and scale it down. And that's going to sort of dim it down a little bit. It's looking pretty cool, right? So we've got a key light that's pretty bright. I might move it just a little farther away using the Z, right? So it's out here a little more. And then we're going to create a backlight. So our next light is going to be another area light. We're going to look through it again, use selected object as camera. I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to rotate 180 degrees just by using my rotation tool here. So 3, some combination of 3 to rotate, 2 to zoom in and out, and 1 to pan around my screen gives me the ability to place this. And I want this one to be up top a little more. And zoomed out a little bit. And then this is going to be called the backlight or the rim light. Again, hit the default camera to get out of that, and you can see that rim light up top. For a moment, I'm just going to turn off my renderer. I'm also going to come up to my display and select shading, not shading with lines. That allows me to see these a little bit more clearly, right? So I can see the positioning of these lights. So this backlight where I positioned it is a little too straight up overhead. So I'm going to use this plane movement and my rotation tool to just point it directly at my object. And then again, see how this looks through the camera. So that's a little better, right? So we're getting some pretty nice lighting all the way around our object. There's a little bit that is still in shadow, but it's not too bad, right? So this is one really nice way to light our objects using a 3-point lighting system and manipulating those lights. So from here, I would do something like modify the colors and the intensity of each one. So recommendation is never to have absolutely 100% bright white for any light because that's not realistic. So I always like to just tone it down a little bit into the sort of yellowy orange ranges and just pull the color down slightly. So it's a little bit in the warm tones. For my fill light, I usually like those to be a little bit more in the cool tones. So I'm just going to slightly pull it over into the blues. And then I'm going to turn the intensity down a little bit to like maybe 80 or 70. So we're just getting that filled in, but it's not overly powerful. And then for the backlight, this is also called a rim light or a hair light. For the backlight, you usually want it to be pretty bright. So I'm just going to leave it in the white tone here, and I'm just going to pull it down so it's a little less white, a little more gray. And then for this one, I think I want to change the shape of that light. So you'll notice that it has a rectangular value. So I'll turn this off. You can see that rectangular value. You can actually change this rectangular shape by clicking these little buttons, and you'll see what that does to the highlight, right? So that's creating a longer sort of highlight strip, which I think feels a little nicer for that rim light. So that's just like a quick basic lighting setup to get you started. I'm going to show you one more option for lighting that I think is really valuable, and that is using a high dynamic range image or HDR image to light your scene. And that's something you can do really simply in Redshift Render Engine. I'm just going to turn all of these off by unchecking them. So no more lights. The default light is back on. And what I'm going to do is come into this attributes or asset browser, and there's actually a HDR lighting situation, and we'll select Studio. And Studio is giving us an HDR studio lighting setup, and you can see representation of, I'm just zooming in right here so we get a better view. You see a representation of what that's going to look like for our models, right? So this one, I love, it's got some color in it. It's a little dull, but it's a nice one to use as like a base. So I use this one often in my scenes as just like an initial light. And so all you really have to do is select this object now and drag it over into you select the image and drop it into your objects panel, and it creates a dome light for you. And this dome light is automatically using that image to light your scene. And so what you see is this like really nice lighting that's just the click of a button and you drag it over, right? And you can always try different images. If you don't like that one, you can come in here and select another one that you feel is more appropriate. So I'll scroll down here and see something that's a little bit different. Maybe this one, right? And I'll take this one and I'm just going to click and drag it right in that spot. And that's going to swap the image. And you notice the image is actually showing up in the background. If you don't want the image to show up in the background, you can just come into this details section. And in the camera tab here, pull this slider down to 0. Right? And now we're only seeing the effects of that light. So this is a really nice lighting scenario where we're getting kind of a rim lighting around the edge. And the next thing I would mention is that you can probably combine some of these, right? If I turn all of these on, I get this nice combination. I would just come in and turn down the maybe intensity to these to half as much as I had them. So maybe like 40, and then maybe like 50 here. And that way we're getting this combination of a 3-point lighting system with a studio lighting system. So you always have the ability to manipulate the intensity of any of these things. I can cut this one down to 0.5. Now I've got this nice blend between some studio lighting and an HDR lighting. We're going to stop with lighting there. I think you have enough information that it's going to allow you to play, to change things as you'd like, and really start to figure things out with the lighting system. I want to show you now how to render this out as something that you can save and use in an animated piece. And it's very simple. This is a very short animation. It's only 3 seconds long, right? It's a 90-frame animation. It just kind of hangs out there. So with any animation, we need to have a camera, right? So let's make a camera. It's going to be a standard camera. I'm going to look through that camera by selecting this button right here. And then I'm going to zoom in and frame my position. So we're going to do a very simple, just like non-moving camera so that we see our cellular division happening. And it's clear. So I'm just manipulating my view of my camera using the same tools, the 1, 2, and 3 that we talked about earlier while looking through my camera, and that is actually moving my camera in space. So if I unclick this camera selection button, you can see the camera in space and that we're actually looking through it, right? So click the camera, we're looking through it, it's important that you are looking through your camera when you render out your animation, when you export or render it. So it's really that simple. Cameras have a lot of settings. You can do shallow depth of field and all of that stuff. That's for another video. I just want to show you some basic understanding right now. So now that we've got our camera uh, framed and we're looking through it the way we want our image to appear, I can scroll through and see if I'm happy with the framing of the animation, and I am. So the first thing I want to do is come out to my 0 frame, and I'm going to add a keyframe, right? So I've selected my camera and I've added a keyframe at frame 0. And what that's done is record that position, scale, rotation for me. So now if I come out later and I'm like, oh no, I moved and completely messed up my camera, all I have to do is move my timeline and it's going to snap back to the previously recorded keyframe, right? So saving that keyframe at the very beginning is important, just to like hold your camera in position. So now I want to show you some basic render settings so that you can get this beautiful animation of the cell dividing rendered out so that you can put it on your website or post it to your YouTube channel or whatever you need to do with it. So I'm going to come into render settings, and that's again this little render settings key, or you can come up to render settings right there. And you can see that we're using Redshift as our render engine. We've got an output tab. Typically we want to render out 1920 by 1080 pixels, and that is standard full HD format, right? So 1920 by 1080 is industry standard format. If you're doing 4K, you need to be aware of that, and you'll set it up for 2160 by 3840 for 4K. And also just be aware, the more pixel value you have in here, the longer your renders are going to take. Luckily, Redshift for simple things like this is going to be pretty fast for us. So I'm going to show you the best way to set up renders in Cinema 4D so you can output your image. 1920 by 1080, we're going to render out all of our frames, right? And we're going to save them, right? So 1920 by 1080, square pixels, all of the frames. Excellent. Now I need to come into my Save tab. And in the Save tab, I'm going to save out JPEGs. So in this image, we're just going to say JPEG. I'm going to tell it to use file name and tell it where to save, right? So click this folder. I come out to my folder and make a new folder for the frames for this one, and we'll call it cell div frames. Open up that folder and give it a file name right here. So if you're using a Mac, your interface might be a little bit different. We'll just call this cell div and save it. And what you see now is that directory is set up in your file save as area here. So we're saving JPEG images. The naming convention is going to be the name with 4 leading zeros dot the file type. So don't get confused by this .tiff here. It's actually going to save JPEGs. This is just telling you how it's naming things. And that is it. So we've got output save, right? One last thing is coming into Redshift. Now, Redshift can take a really long time to render if you have the settings turned up high. We don't have a lot of things going on in this animation, so I'm going to show you my default render settings. This is what I use for almost everything. It renders much faster, and we just have to make a couple of settings changes. So I'm going to change this from basic to advanced. So again, Redshift is selected. I'm coming to advanced. I'm going to increase my samples to 0.6. And more samples actually means really less quality. But this is kind of a cheat. Like if you have really fine detail textures and things like that, this might not work for you, but for this animation, it's going to work great. So I'm going to turn off. So again, step 1, change it redshift to advanced, increase the threshold to something like 0.5 or 0.6, turn off random noise pattern, turn on denoising, come into global illumination, make them both brute force, right? Your primary and your secondary are both brute force, and that's it. So we've turned on our sampling so that it's going to be working quickly. You'll notice now if I come into my IPR, it's going to be rendering a little bit differently, a little faster than it was before. You'll notice there's that brief speckle of information before it denoises, but this is going to render out really quickly for us and create a very nice quality image. If you need to create higher quality, you can always turn down the sample rate. So the closer to 0 you get, the higher quality your image is going to be. Right. So now that we've got that set up, the next step is simply to render. So we're going to go up to render and we're going to say render to picture viewer. You'll also notice that button is right here, render to picture viewer, or it's Shift R on your keyboard. So Shift R. We're going to render out every frame now, and you'll see that it takes a little bit of time, but we're rendering in just a little bit over. The first one usually takes a little bit longer, right? Then it's doing 2 seconds a frame, which is pretty good. So 2 seconds a frame right now, and I'll go ahead and fast forward this, and then we'll look at our result, and then we'll move on to the next section. So our animation has finished, and let's check it out. Once it's finished, it pops up in this picture viewer, and you can just hit play, and it's going to run through the animation, and it's going to show it to you, all of your frames, and you can just watch it over and over. It's playing back sort of real time. You can see there are a few frames that are clicking, and depending on your system, it'll be more or less real time. But we've created our first animation together. Congratulations. Let's go ahead and save this out now as an actual video file, and you can do that straight from here, or you can import these frames into something like After Effects and do it that way. But this is an easy way to do it. We'll say save image as, change it from still image to animation. Under options, under to type, we're going to say save an MP4. And it'll be an HT64 MP4 file, all frames, and I'll hit OK. And now it's going to ask me where I want to save it. I'll just go back one level. That'll save that out. And now if I look in that folder, I'll see that animation in there, and it is playing for us. I think you'll have better luck if you actually use something like After Effects, Adobe After Effects, or any Premiere or something like that. You can also import an image sequence in that software and use it that way. So that does it for our run through of Cinema 4D, but don't leave yet. I've got a few tips for you moving forward. And so I just want to share with you a page that I have. I'll put a link for this in the description so you can access it. But I've got a page out on my website that has some ideas for continuing training. So just like where to go next with this process, if you want to keep learning, you've got a couple of options. What's nice is there are some tutorial channels, YouTube people that I like to follow, channels I like to follow, artists to check out, some books to look at. And I'll update this to have some more contemporary information on there. But hopefully this will help you just kind of have a guide and some resources to continue your journey as you continue to learn Cinema 4D. I'll also include some other links in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you can get all the updates coming up for new videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment about anything you have questions about or the biggest takeaways from the video. And if you have any suggestions for future Cinema 4D tutorials about science and medicine, please drop those in the comments too. And don't forget to grab your free resource bundle. The link's in the description. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.